The envelope was cream-colored, the same shade as the sympathy cards still stacked on the kitchen counter at home, and Caspian handed it to his wife while she was still holding the program from her father's memorial service. Gareth Rowe had been buried that morning. The flowers on his casket hadn't even wilted yet. Imogen Aldane Rowe, 36-year-old daughter of the late Gareth Rowe and silent controlling owner of the Rowe Group, one of the most respected architecture and urban development firms in the region, looked down at the envelope without opening it. She already understood from the weight of it what was inside. 4 years of marriage distilled into paper. Her husband had been carrying it in his breast pocket during the eulogy, during the graveside prayer, through 2 hours of condolences and cold coffee in the firm's main gallery, surrounded by her father's models and blueprints and photographs of buildings that still stood, because Gareth Rowe had believed good design was a kind of mercy. Vesper Lund, 29-year-old independent project consultant, hired for the firm's upcoming Gareth Rowe Memorial Pavilion campaign, stepped from behind Caspian with a small, patient smile. She wore a charcoal dress that was tasteful enough to pass as grief, but fitted enough to announce something else entirely. Caspian Hale, 41-year-old principal architect and senior vice president of the Rowe Group, said nothing to his wife first. He looked over her shoulder at the gallery of her father's life's work behind her and said, with the kind of calm that people practiced in mirrors, that he had waited until after the service because he wasn't cruel. Imogen looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Vesper. Then she looked back at the envelope in her hands. She did not cry, she did not raise her voice. She simply, "You chose today." Caspian's jaw shifted. "You've known this was coming. I need someone beside me who understands the life I'm building. Someone who fits the rooms I'm about to walk into." Tamsin Prell, 36-year-old closest friend of Imogen since graduate school, stood 3 feet away with a paper cup of coffee that she set down very carefully so she wouldn't throw it. Quentin Merrow, 63-year-old family attorney of the Rowe estate and executor of Gareth's trust, stood near the back wall with his face arranged into something that was not quite patience. Vesper placed one hand on Caspian's arm with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Imogen looked at the envelope once more. Then she slipped it into her bag unopened and turned back toward the photographs on the wall. Caspian left with Vesper under his umbrella. He believed he had walked away cleanly. He believed the quiet woman, standing in a gallery full of her father's life's work, was simply too broken to do anything about it. He was wrong about that, in a way that would take him several weeks to understand. The Rowe Group was not a small operation. Based in a converted 19th-century printing house in the city's design district, it employed over 200 people across architecture, civil engineering, urban planning, and community development. Its portfolio included municipal buildings, university campuses, 2 nationally recognized transit centers, and a mixed-use riverfront development that had won 4 awards in its first year. What most people knew about the Rowe Group was that Gareth had founded it 40 years ago, with a second-hand drafting table, a borrowed camera, and a belief that the built environment should protect people first and impress people second. What most people did not know was who actually controlled it now. Imogen held a quiet position on the company's internal roster as Heritage and Preservation Liaison. She attended meetings occasionally, was seen carrying folders through the building's older archive rooms, and was generally understood to be helping with legacy documentation. Some people assumed she was there because she was Gareth's daughter. Some people assumed she was there because she was Caspian's wife. None of those people knew about Aldane Holdings. Aldane Holdings was a private trust entity established in Imogen's maiden name. It controlled 71% of the Rowe Group's equity. Gareth had structured it that way deliberately, 15 years before he died, after watching 2 colleagues lose family businesses to outside investors who had smiled at the right meetings. The trust was sealed, the ownership structure was documented, and only a small circle of people, Quentin, the firm's CFO Hadley Foss, and the head of digital security Oswin Tate, knew that the Heritage and Preservation Liaison was in fact the majority owner and incoming chair of the entire firm. Caspian had known Imogen's family held equity in the Rowe Group. He had never asked how much. He had never asked what kind. That was a thing about Caspian. He was very good at noticing things that confirmed what he already believed, and very good at not noticing the rest. Hadley Foss, 53-year-old chief financial officer of the Rowe Group, and a woman who had worked through 3 hostile acquisition attempts without blinking, found Imogen in the archive room the morning after the memorial. Imogen was at the drafting table in the corner, working through a set of her father's original blueprints for the Gareth Rowe Memorial Pavilion. The pavilion was the firm's largest current project, a public gathering space built on a site her father had spent the last decade of his life securing. Its groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled in 3 weeks, and Caspian had been positioning himself for months as the creative lead. Hadley placed a folder on the table without ceremony. There are things you need to see. The first document was a hotel invoice. 4 nights at a rate the Rowe Group had no business paying, charged to the pavilion development budget under the category of design consultation. The registered guest was Vesper Lund. The second was a reimbursement claim. Equipment listed as project materials, delivered to a personal address. There were more. Consulting fees routed to a shell company with no deliverables on file. A photography contract described as site documentation that produced nothing but styled portraits of Caspian at various locations around the city. A publicity budget item approved by Caspian and co-signed by Fen Caro, 58-year-old board member who had spent the better part of a year trying to shift the firm toward the kind of commercial contracts that would benefit people like Fen Caro specifically. Imogen read each page without speaking. Then Hadley opened the second folder. There's something else. About the pavilion design. Yale Breck, 27-year-old junior architect at the Rowe Group, had joined the firm 2 years ago carrying a portfolio that the hiring committee still talked about. His thesis project, a community shelter that used passive ventilation and reclaimed materials to create a space that felt both humble and extraordinary, had drawn a personal note from Gareth Rowe himself, who had not attended thesis presentations in 11 years. Caspian had mentored him, or at least that was what it looked like. He had invited Yale to his office to review the early pavilion concepts. He had asked Yale to develop some ideas on paper, informally, just to see where they went. He had said the firm appreciated original thinking and that young architects who showed vision early were remembered well. 6 months later, the pavilion design that Caspian presented to the board looked very much like the sketches Yale had left in Caspian's office: the site orientation, the central light well, the layered public and private circulation paths, the material palette that Yale had drawn directly from Gareth's early work as a form of tribute. Yale had raised it once carefully with a senior colleague. He was told he should be grateful for the learning opportunity. When Imogen met with him in a small conference room, Tamsin sitting near the door, Quentin's recorder running openly on the table, Yale held a folder of dated digital files, original sketches with metadata, and emails in which Caspian had asked him to send over those rough concepts from last fall. "I thought he'd give me credit eventually," Yale said. "His hands were not steady. I thought it was just how the industry worked, that you paid dues first." Imogen looked at him the way her father had once looked at a young writer whose contract had been signed away for almost nothing. She remembered that moment clearly. She had been 16, sitting outside her father's office. A woman was inside crying quietly into a tissue while Gareth sat across from her with his hands folded on his desk and his voice very careful and low. Afterward, he had come into the hallway and found Imogen waiting and said, without preamble, that when a powerful person takes someone's work and calls it their own, they are not just stealing credit. They are erasing proof that the other person was ever in the room. Back in the conference room, Imogen looked at Yale. "That is not how it works in this building," she said, "and it will not happen to you again." Oswin Tate, 39-year-old head of digital security for the Rowe Group, was the kind of person who made other people nervous without doing anything in particular to cause it. He was precise, quiet, and loyal to the Rowe family in a way that predated his employment. Gareth had hired him after Oswin caught a data breach that 2 outside firms had missed. He met with Imogen, Quentin, and Hadley on the 3rd night after the memorial. "There's more than the expense documents," Oswin said, setting his laptop on the table. "I've been watching the pavilion file access logs since Hadley flagged the billing irregularities. Caspian accessed the original design archive 4 times after hours. He downloaded Yale's preliminary files and uploaded modified versions with his own metadata. He also sent 3 emails to a private account from his company device. 2 of them contained the pavilion structural drawings marked confidential." Quentin tapped his legal pad. "Who received them?" Oswin looked at the screen. A development company registered to Fen Caro's personal address. The room went quiet. Fen was not just redirecting company money through falsified budget items. He was receiving proprietary design documents that he could use to replicate the project for a competing development. The corruption had 2 branches, and they fed the same route. Imogen looked toward the window. Outside, the drafting house's old brick facade was dark, except for the lamp above the entrance, the same lamp her father had left burning every night for 37 years. "Set the trap," she said. Oswin had already written the code, a watermark embedded invisibly into every sensitive file, tracking any attempt to copy, forward, or modify the documents. If anyone tried to touch the pavilion design files again, the system would record the device, the time, the location, and every action taken. The trap was active by morning. Caspian did not know the trap existed. He was busy being celebrated. A design industry publication was running a feature on the pavilion, and Caspian had agreed to a photo shoot and interview at the firm's main gallery. He wore a charcoal suit. He smiled with the ease of a man who had not done the hard thing and had not paid for it yet. The journalist asked about his creative process. He talked for 11 minutes about instinct and vision and the courage to depart from legacy. He mentioned Gareth Rowe once, briefly, as a foundational influence. He did not mention Yale. Vesper attended the shoot, standing at the edge of the frame and adjusting Caspian's collar before each camera position. Rissa Gott, 31-year-old lifestyle correspondent, who fed industry gossip to 3 different publications under various pseudonyms, circulated near the catering table and made a note to add a line about Caspian's renewed personal energy following a quiet separation from his wife. In a small office on the building's upper floor, Imogen read a summary of the interview Hadley had obtained from a source at the publication. She folded it and set it aside. The groundbreaking ceremony was in 11 days. She called Quentin. "How long will outside counsel need to review the documentation?" "They can clear it in a week," Quentin said. "Maybe less." "Then give them a week." 3 days before the ceremony, Oswin's watermark triggered at 11:47 p.m. Fen Caro had attempted to open the pavilion's structural engineering package from a private device. The system blocked the download and logged everything. Within an hour, Imogen was in the security office with Quentin and Hadley, reading the trace. Fen had also forwarded 2 internal budget documents to an address outside the company domain, and embedded in the access log was something else. A voice note recovered from Caspian's deleted company archive, sent through the firm's internal messaging system to Vesper 4 days after the memorial service. Oswin played it once. Caspian's voice came through clearly. "By the time she figures out anything's wrong," he said, "she'll be too far into grief to put up a real fight. And by then we'll already have the ceremony on record with my name on everything." No one spoke for a moment. Tamsin, sitting in the corner, covered her mouth. Imogen listened to it a second time. Then she turned to Quentin. "What do we do with that?" she asked. "Last," Quentin said quietly. "Use the financial misconduct first, the design theft second. Let his own words be the last thing the room hears." Imogen nodded. "That's right." The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony was clear and cold. The site of the Gareth Rowe Memorial Pavilion occupied a full city block in a neighborhood her father had spent the last decade advocating for. Community members were present. City officials were present. Investors and board members and longtime firm partners had traveled from 3 states. Caspian arrived with Vesper. His name ran larger than the project title on the ceremony program. He had 3 weeks earlier quietly removed Imogen from the guest list. The program listed her as unable to attend. Imogen arrived through a side entrance with Quentin, Hadley, Oswin, and Tamsin. She wore a long grey coat, her mother's sapphire pin at the collar, and her father's old drafting compass in her coat pocket. The same compass Gareth had carried on every site visit for 30 years. She looked like a woman attending a quiet ceremony for someone she had loved. No cameras found her when she walked in. Yale sat near the back in a dark blazer that didn't quite fit him. He had asked Imogen twice whether he was sure he should be there. Both times she had said yes. Ben Caro sat in the second row. He had been told, through a carefully worded message from Quentin that morning, that a brief procedural matter would precede the ceremony's official start. He had not been told what it was. Caspian reached the podium. The applause was warm. He let it settle the way a man does when he's been rehearsing a moment in his head for a long time. He talked about legacy, about the responsibility of carrying forward a great man's vision. He thanked Vesper by name, as his creative partner and the person who had believed in the project from the beginning. Several people in the audience exchanged glances. Then he introduced the presentation reel. The screen at the back of the tent went dark. 3 seconds passed. Then the row group's official legal seal appeared, not the ceremony logo. Caspian's smile held for 2 more seconds, then it didn't. The first document that appeared was the hotel invoice. 4 nights, Vesper Lund, development budget, community facility designation. The whisper that moved through the tent started in the back and reached the press section within 4 seconds. The next document was the shell company payment records, then the falsified design consultation invoices, then the forwarded structural drawings, timestamped, traced, watermarked, with Fen Caro's name in the recipient field. Fen stood. His chair scraped against the temporary flooring. 2 firm security staff appeared at his row with the quiet, unhurried manner of people who had been positioned there an hour earlier. Then Yael's original sketches appeared on the screen, dated, cross-referenced with the pavilion design Caspian had submitted as his own work. The similarities moved through the audience like something physical. Caspian stepped away from the podium. "Shut it off," he said. Nobody moved. He said it again, louder, and the cameras turned toward him. The screen displayed the text of a formal board authorization. Outside counsel had reviewed the materials. The ethics committee had approved the disclosure. Everything shown was preserved under legal hold. Then the audio played. "By the time she figures out anything's wrong," Caspian's own voice said through the speakers, "she'll be too far into grief to put up a real fight." A woman in the 3rd row put her hand over her heart. A city official leaned toward his colleague and said something that didn't carry. The press cameras shifted from the screen to the audience, scanning. The final slide appeared. Row Group controlling entity, Aldane Holdings, majority owner and active chair Imogen Aldane Rowe. The tent went very still. Then it turned, searching. Imogen stepped out from the side of the tent into the open space between the rows. She did not hurry. She wore no name tag, no title, no signal of authority, except for the founding partner pin at her collar, the same pin her father had worn every single day for 37 years. The audience parted without being asked. When she reached the front, she did not stand at Caspian's podium. She moved to the edge of the stage and stood beside Yael Breck, who had risen from his seat in the back row and walked forward because she had asked him to be there when this moment came. That single choice told everyone in the room what they needed to understand. Imogen looked at the assembled guests, investors, officials, community members, press, employees, all the people Caspian had wanted witnessing his triumph, and spoke clearly. "My father built this firm to serve communities that larger institutions overlooked. This site, this project, and the design you will see built on this ground were created out of that same commitment. Effective today, the Rowe Group has initiated formal action regarding misconduct connected to this project's development. The pavilion will proceed. It will proceed under the credit of its originating designer." She glanced at Yael for a moment, "and under the values of the people who built this firm from nothing." Caspian stared at her. His face had moved through several arrangements and settled somewhere between fury and incomprehension. "You own this," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I protected it," Imogen said. "There's a difference." He tried once more, lowering his voice. "You should have told me." "You never asked who I was," she said. "You only decided what I was worth." Quentin stepped forward with a sealed envelope and placed it in Caspian's hand. His executive access had been suspended effective that morning. Formal notices had been prepared for Fen Caro, for Vesper Lund, and for Rissa Galt, whose paid gossip placements had been traced to the same shell account as the design consultation invoices. Vesper left through the side exit before the ceremony formally ended. The cameras that had been aimed at her minutes earlier, the cameras she had dressed for, positioned for, believed would record her standing in the place of a wife, turned to follow her out. Yael signed the revised contract that afternoon with hands that barely shook. In the weeks that followed, Caspian's name was removed from the pavilion project files. The design credit was formally transferred and published. The shell company payments were referred to outside investigators. Fen Caro resigned from the board before the formal removal vote was called. Rissa Galt's publication access to the firm was permanently revoked. The Gareth Rowe Memorial Pavilion broke ground on schedule. Imogen attended every site visit. She kept her father's drafting compass in her coat pocket each time, running her thumb over the worn brass when something was hard, which was often because grief did not stop simply because justice had moved forward. She had not fixed everything. Some mornings, the loss of her father sat on her chest before she was fully awake, and some evenings she still caught herself wanting to call someone who was no longer there to answer. But she stopped entering the firm through the archive room. The first morning she used the main entrance. She walked through the lobby, and a young architect she barely knew looked up from the reception desk and said good morning. Not the way people say it to someone they're surprised to see in a given place, but the way they say it to someone who belongs there. Imogen walked beneath the lettered glass bearing her father's name and thought about something he had told her once, standing in this same lobby, when the floors were still new and the paint still sharp. Build something worth protecting, he had said, then protect it. She intended to.